Camille had been sketching her dream wedding dress since she was 8. Not just doodles in a notebook, but full-blown designs on tracing paper, folded into a journal she kept hidden beneath her bed. She imagined every detail: the sweeping train, delicate lace sleeves, and a ceremony bathed in candlelight and soft string music. For most, dreams like these faded with time. But for Camille, the dream only sharpened, refined by the years and molded by the romantic within her. At 29, she stood at the edge of making it all come true. Her fiancé, Julian, was a soft-spoken, thoughtful man she'd met at a charity conference 2 years prior. He wasn't flashy or flamboyant, but he listened, truly listened, and that made her fall for him fast and deep. After a quiet proposal in a field of lavender on a warm spring day, wedding plans began. Everything seemed set to perfection. Camille's family came from old money, the kind that funded private galleries and underwrote political campaigns. Her father, Marcel Dubois, was a titan in international trade law, and her mother, Sabine, a celebrated art curator with a taste for the avant-garde. Their estate, a century-old chateau tucked in the hills outside Lyon, had hosted state dinners and celebrity galas. Camille had grown up surrounded by opulence, polished marble, custom-tailored uniforms for the staff, holidays in private villas. Yet, it was in that grandeur that she often felt most alone. Her parents loved her in the abstract, through gifts and opportunities, but not in the everyday, not in the warmth of presence or the consistency of comfort. Most childhood memories were of dinner parties she wasn't invited to, corridors she was told not to enter, and long hours in the care of nannies and house staff. But amidst that sterile luxury, there was one light: Gérard. He was the estate's caretaker, a wiry man with calloused hands, deep laugh lines, and eyes that twinkled when he told a joke, often about himself. He had been in the Dubois household since before Camille was born, first as a groundskeeper, then as an all-round handyman. While others referred to him dismissively as the old helper, to Camille, he was mon oncle G. Uncle G. Gérard taught her to ride a bike on the gravel paths behind the vineyard. He built her a treehouse from discarded crates. When she fell and scraped her knees, he had bandages ready, not just in a first aid kit, but tucked into the pockets of his overalls. When her hamster died, it was Gérard who helped her bury it under a pear tree and plant forget-me-nots around the grave. He told her once, "Family isn't just who shares your name, it's who stays to sweep the broken pieces." And Gérard always stayed. Now, 2 weeks before the wedding, Camille stood in the garden of the estate, watching him trim the wild hedges. His back was bent a little more than before, and his hair was entirely gray, but his movements were still precise. Still careful. She walked barefoot across the grass, her designer sandals forgotten by the steps. "Uncle G," she called softly. He turned, his face lighting up. "Ah, mon petit lion," he said, using the childhood nickname he had coined, his little lioness. She hugged him tightly, burying her face into the scent of grass and wood oil and soap. "I hope," she whispered into his chest, "you've got something nice to wear from my wedding. I expect you front and center." He pulled back slightly, startled. "Camille. You know that's not really my place. I'm just." "No," she said firmly, taking his hands in hers. "You are not just anything. You are my family." Gérard blinked, eyes moistening. "But your parents? The guests?" "I don't care what anyone thinks," she said, her voice steady. "You belong there. And I want the world to know it." He smiled softly, touched by her words, but she saw hesitation flicker behind his eyes. When the day of the wedding arrived, the estate was transformed. The gardens were lit by hundreds of lanterns, the chapel was draped in blush silk and ivory roses, and a quartet played softly as guests in tuxedos and gowns took their places. Camille was luminous in her custom-designed gown, the train flowing like water behind her. As she walked toward Julian, her gaze swept over the sea of faces and paused when she spotted Gérard, tucked between relatives and acquaintances in the third row. He was dressed in a simple charcoal suit. His tie was slightly crooked. But his eyes, they shone with pride. She gave him a smile, full, warm, and unmistakable. Julian noticed. "Friend of the family?" he whispered with a smile as she reached him. Camille took his hand. "The best kind." The ceremony was flawless. Vows exchanged. Applause warm and genuine. As the couple exited into the courtyard, champagne flutes clinked, and laughter echoed through the ancient stone arches. But Gerard lingered at the edge of it all. He stood beneath a magnolia tree, hands clasped behind his back, watching the festivities like a man peering into a life he once helped build but felt he had no claim to. That was about to change. The reception was the kind of affair people would talk about for months. Waitstaff in crisp uniforms moved with the elegance of ballet dancers, champagne flowed freely, and the estate's courtyard shimmered beneath a lattice of golden lights. Guests marveled at the decor, the gourmet food, the bride's elegance. It was, by all external measures, a flawless evening. But Gerard stood quietly beneath the magnolia tree, holding a glass of sparkling water he hadn't yet touched. From where he stood, he could see everything: the sea of silk and tuxedos, Camille spinning gently in Julien's arms on the dance floor, laughter bursting like fireworks from the groups clustered near the hors d'oeuvres. He felt out of place, not because anyone had said anything unkind, but because invisibility was something he'd worn for decades like a second skin. He knew how to blend into the background. He was part of the house's rhythm, the quiet machinery that made luxury seem effortless. For all Camille's kindness, a part of him still believed he didn't truly belong. He hadn't earned a seat at the table, just a shadow at its edge. "Excuse me, sir," came a soft voice. Gerard turned. One of the young waiters stood in front of him, balancing a tray of red wine glasses, looking slightly harried. He couldn't have been older than 20. "I was told to restock the drinks from the cellar, but I don't know where that is," the young man said, cheeks flushed. "Could you show me?" Gerard hesitated. He wasn't working tonight. He was a guest. Camille had insisted. But instinct took over. He nodded. "Follow me." He led the young waiter through the narrow side path to the kitchen entrance, pointing out where the reserve bottles were stored, how to handle the more delicate vintages. The staff knew him, of course. They welcomed his presence, trusted his wisdom. When the young man tried to thank him, Gerard waved it off with a humble smile. "Just habit." As he turned to leave, the head server stopped him. "We're short one hand to cover the terrace rotation. Just for a little while, would you mind?" Again, Gerard paused. Part of him wanted to say no. But helping felt more comfortable than mingling. At least this way, he had a purpose. A way to feel useful. "Give me a tray," he said with a small smile. And just like that, he returned to the rhythm he knew so well, circulating quietly among guests, offering wine with a polite nod, avoiding eye contact, slipping unnoticed between conversations like he always had. From across the courtyard, Camille saw him. Her brow furrowed in confusion. She handed her wineglass to Julien and made her way through the crowd. She found Gerard near the back of the hall, delicately placing a glass on a table as the string quartet transitioned to a new melody. "What are you doing?" she asked softly, arms crossed. Gerard straightened, looking almost guilty. "Just helping. It's easier this way. Less awkward." "You're a guest," Camille said firmly. "You're not supposed to be carrying trays." "I'm not like them," he said, gesturing vaguely at the glittering crowd. "I don't belong here, not in that way." Her eyes softened, and she took the tray from his hands, placing it on a nearby table. "You don't belong with the staff, either. You belong with me. At my side. You're not here to serve anyone tonight, Uncle G." "I know," he replied, voice low. "But sometimes, it's hard to forget where you've always stood." Camille took a deep breath, gently reaching for his arm. "Then let me remind you." She led him through the crowd, weaving between guests and flowered archways, back toward the center of the celebration. He resisted, at first, embarrassed, unsure, but she didn't let go. When they reached the main courtyard, she stopped him. "Wait here," she said. And then she did something that would be remembered for decades to come. She stepped onto the edge of the dance floor, raised her glass, and gently tapped it with a silver spoon. The music quieted, conversations died down, and all eyes turned to her. "I hope you're all having a beautiful night," she began, her voice calm but commanding. "Tonight, I married the love of my life. But I also want to honor someone else, someone who made me who I am." She motioned to Gerard, who stood, stunned, under a trellis of white roses. This is Gerard. Many of you may know him as the caretaker of this estate. But to me, he's so much more. He was my guide when I was lost, my comfort when I was hurting, and the person who taught me more about love and resilience than anyone else. He's not just part of this household. He's part of my heart. A collective silence filled the air. I saved a dance, she said, just for him. Gerard's face turned crimson. He shook his head lightly, whispering, "No, no, Camille." But she was already beside him, hand outstretched. "Please." His hand trembled as he took hers. The string quartet, sensing the moment, shifted into a soft waltz. Camille and Gerard stepped onto the floor. They moved slowly, gently, as if time had reversed and they were once again in the backyard, practicing her first dance moves on his old boots. "Remember when I couldn't tell left from right?" she asked, smiling through tears. "You still can't," he teased. Laughter fluttered through the crowd. From the sidelines, Sabine, Camille's mother, watched with mixed emotions, surprise, guilt, awe. She had always thought of Gerard as part of the staff, not part of the family. But now, she saw the way her daughter's eyes lit up, the way this humble man carried her as gently as a father. Other couples slowly joined them, and the awkwardness melted into something tender, something real. In that moment, Gerard no longer stood at the margins. He was, undeniably, in the heart of it all. The dance ended to the sound of soft applause, and Gerard, flustered and overwhelmed, stepped back into the crowd. Camille kissed him on the cheek, whispering, "Thank you for everything," before being swept away once more by guests eager for photos and congratulations. For a little while, everything returned to the rhythm of celebration. Glasses clinked. Candles flickered. The band shifted to more upbeat music, drawing a growing crowd to the dance floor. Gerard lingered near the terrace, caught somewhere between pride and discomfort. Though Camille had lifted him up in front of everyone, old habits die hard. He felt eyes on him, some curious, some warm, others calculating. He wasn't used to being seen. He had built a life out of quiet service, always in the background, his presence felt but rarely acknowledged. To ease the tightness in his chest, he did what felt natural, he returned to motion. "Let me help circulate the wine," he said to a flustered young waiter who was juggling too many tasks at once. The boy looked unsure. "Sir, I thank you." "It's all right," Gerard said with a wink. "Just one tray." The waiter handed him a polished silver tray with 8 tall glasses of deep red wine. Gerard steadied it with practiced hands and began weaving through the crowd once again. He didn't notice Camille watching from across the dance floor, her smile fading slightly as she saw him slip back into old roles. But before she could call out to him, it happened. A guest, one of Julian's exuberant cousins, already tipsy from too many cocktails, bounded toward the center of the floor, spinning in a ridiculous attempt to mimic a waltz. He collided headlong into Gerard just as he was passing behind the bride. Time slowed. The tray flew from Gerard's hands. Glasses shattered. A dark splash of red arced through the air. It landed squarely on Camille's pristine wedding gown. Gasps echoed like thunder. The music cut out. Conversation stopped. The room froze. Camille stood in the center, her ivory silk gown now streaked with merlot. Red rivulets ran down the delicate lace, soaking into the bodice and staining the hem. The stain was vivid, almost violent in its contrast, like blood against snow. Gerard's face turned white. He looked at the broken glass, the stunned guests, then Camille. His voice faltered. "Camille. I'm so sorry." He stepped back, mortified, hands trembling. His entire body seemed to fold in on itself. All the pride he had felt only moments before drained away in an instant, replaced by decades of conditioned shame. "I'll leave," he mumbled, eyes downcast. "I never should have." "Uncle G," Camille said, interrupting softly. Everyone turned back to her. She looked down at her gown, the ruin of silk and lace, then back at him. And she smiled, not a forced, tight smile, but a real one. Warm. Loving. "Are you all right?" she asked gently. Gerard blinked. "What? Did you cut yourself? Are you hurt?" she repeated. He shook his head. "No. But your dress." "It's a dress," she said. "You're what matters." Whispers swept through the crowd, but Camille ignored them. She stepped forward, took Gerard's hands in hers, still trembling, and gave them a light squeeze. "You shouldn't have been carrying a tray," she said, her voice breaking. "You were supposed to be celebrating." "I didn't know how," he whispered. "I've always worked in this house. I didn't know how to just be part of it." "You're the heart of it," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You have always been family." And then, in the middle of her ruined wedding gown, she did something no one expected. She wrapped her arms around Gerard and hugged him tightly. The red wine seeped into his jacket, but neither of them cared. A tear rolled down her cheek. "This dress?" she said, pulling back and brushing her hand across the stained fabric. "This stain is a reminder of who really stood by me my whole life. Not out of duty. Out of love." The DJ, watching from his booth, restarted the music, a soft, instrumental piece. Camille turned back to Gerard and smiled through her tears. "I believe I still owe you a second dance." He chuckled, eyes wet. "I think this time, I'll let you lead." They returned to the dance floor, moving slowly, gently. This time, everyone watched not with amusement, but with reverence. The mood shifted from shock to awe, and then to warmth. Guests began dabbing their eyes, clapping quietly, smiling at the scene before them. Julien watched from the side, beaming with admiration. This was the woman he loved, graceful, kind, fearless in the face of embarrassment. Sabine, Camille's mother, stood at the back of the crowd, silent and still. For the first time, she saw Gerard not as the man who had swept her garden or fixed broken shutters, but as someone who had filled a space in her daughter's heart that no one else had. Her eyes brimmed with a mixture of regret and awe. As the music swelled, other guests began joining the dance floor again. Couples swayed side by side with Camille and Gerard. The wedding, which had threatened to derail in the most dramatic way, had transformed into something softer, deeper, more real. The spill of wine had broken the illusion of perfection. But in its place, something far better had been revealed. Truth. Love. Family. As the music enveloped them in its soft embrace, Camille and Gerard swayed gently in the center of the dance floor, surrounded by a circle of guests who watched in silence. The bride's once pristine gown was now visibly soaked with red wine, but it no longer mattered. In fact, it added something human, something beautiful, an imperfection that told a greater story than lace or silk ever could. Gerard's hand trembled slightly on her back, his other gently clasping hers. His posture was uncertain at first, like a man remembering a language he hadn't spoken in decades. But as the melody continued, he fell into rhythm, not just with the music, but with Camille. Just like the afternoons in the orchard when he taught her to dance on his work boots, back when her head barely reached his waist. "You've gotten taller," he joked quietly. Camille laughed through her tears. "You've gotten slower. And you've gotten bolder," he smiled. She rested her cheek on his shoulder. "Only because of you." They danced slowly, gently, as though the rest of the world had dissolved into mist. Around them, something remarkable was happening. Guests who had been stiff with social etiquette now softened. Some wiped their eyes. Others whispered words of admiration. Many stood still, as if caught in a moment they knew they'd never forget. Then one couple stepped forward, then another. Soon, the dance floor was filled with family and friends, all drawn to the raw, real beauty of the moment. It was no longer about status, no longer about show. It was about connection. Camille's husband, Julien, watched from the edge of the floor, his heart full. He didn't feel threatened or replaced. On the contrary, he felt awe. This was the woman he married, a woman who honored love in all its forms, who carried grace not just in how she looked but in how she treated people. She had shown everyone what it meant to stand for something deeper than appearances. He walked forward, gently tapping Gerard on the shoulder. "May I cut in?" Gerard grinned. "Of course." As Julien took Camille in his arms, Gerard stepped aside, tears still clinging to his lashes. He watched them, hand over his heart, feeling warmth he hadn't felt in years, not just because Camille had honored him, but because for the first time, he believed it was true. He belonged. As the music ended, Camille kissed Julien's cheek and turned to Gerard again. "Wait," she said, rushing to the microphone near the band. She tapped it lightly, her stained dress swaying behind her like a banner. The murmuring crowd turned their attention toward her once more. "I want to say something," she began. "You all came here expecting a perfect wedding. But what you've seen tonight is something I didn't plan, something better." She glanced down at her dress, then back up. "I could have let a mistake ruin this night. But the truth is, it gave me a chance to honor someone who deserves so much more than he's ever asked for." She gestured to Gerard, who stood at the edge of the crowd, half trying to hide, half wanting to vanish. "This man," she said, "raised me. Not with lessons from books, or money, or influence, but with kindness. With time. With his hands, and his stories, and his presence. While the rest of the world was too busy, he showed up. Always." Gerard looked down, overwhelmed. Camille continued, "He once told me that family isn't always who shares your name, it's who stays to sweep the broken pieces. Well, he's swept mine more times than I can count." She paused, her voice trembling. "So yes, my dress is ruined. But my heart is full. And I wouldn't change a single thing." The crowd erupted into applause, sincere, thunderous, and long-lasting. After the speech, something shifted. Gerard was no longer the invisible man in the shadows. He was surrounded by guests who shook his hand, thanked him, asked him for stories about Camille as a child. He told a few, like the time she hid a duck in her closet for 2 days, or when she insisted her stuffed giraffe needed its own chair at dinner. His voice shook at first but grew steadier, richer with each laugh he earned. Sabine, Camille's mother, approached him with hesitation. "Gerard," she began, "I." He nodded gently. "You don't have to say it." "I do," she insisted. "I should have seen it. All these years, you were more than I ever realized. And I'm sorry I didn't honor that sooner." Gerard gave her a kind smile. "What matters is now." Later, as the celebration wound down, and guests began saying their goodbyes, Camille sat beside Gerard beneath the magnolia tree where he'd first watched the evening unfold. She took his hand in hers. "I meant it," she said softly. "About you being part of my family. When Julian and I have children, I want them to know you. To hear your stories. To ride on your shoulders like I did." He laughed. "I'm not sure my back can handle that anymore." She smiled. "Then you can teach them how to build a birdhouse. Or a kite. Or how to dance." He squeezed her hand gently. "It would be the honor of my life." The stars blinked above them as the last notes of the band faded into the night. Somewhere inside, Julian was helping pack up the final pieces of the party. Staff bustled, tables were cleared. But outside, under the quiet canopy of stars and magnolias, something timeless lingered. Not perfection. But something better. Truth. Connection. Family. Dawn began to stretch across the sky, tinting the clouds above the estate in soft hues of rose and lavender. The wedding had long since faded into quiet cleanup, tables were being folded, floral arrangements boxed, and champagne flutes stacked. But in the quiet aftermath, the feeling still lingered, something meaningful had taken place. Something that no planner or designer could have ever orchestrated. Camille sat on the veranda steps, still in her stained wedding dress, barefoot now, her heels discarded long ago. She held a cup of tea in both hands, the steam curling gently against the morning air. Julian came out, slipping his jacket over her shoulders. "You didn't want to change?" he asked, looking at the red-streaked silk she still wore. Camille shook her head, smiling softly. "This dress tells the real story. The one I'll actually remember." He sat beside her. "You know, people say weddings are about memories. I think ours gave everyone a little more than they expected. They'll forget the floral centerpieces and the wine selection," she said. "But they'll remember Gerard." Julian nodded. "He's remarkable." Camille's eyes drifted across the lawn to where Gerard stood beneath a cherry tree, speaking with 2 of Julian's cousins. They were laughing, genuinely. One had even asked for advice on restoring old furniture after learning Gerard once built Camille a dollhouse out of discarded wine crates and roofing shingles. For the first time in her life, Camille saw Gerard standing not in the periphery, not as someone in the background, but as someone fully seen and embraced. Not as a helper or servant, but as a cornerstone of her world, acknowledged now by others in the same way she had always known in her heart. Sabine, Camille's mother, approached her gently. "I owe you something," she said, standing just behind them. Camille turned. "What do you mean?" Sabine knelt, brushing her daughter's hair gently off her shoulder. "I owe you an apology," she said. "For not seeing what you saw. For letting someone so important to you go unappreciated for so long." Camille took her mother's hand. "You see it now. That's what matters." Sabine smiled, eyes damp. "I want him to be part of our lives, Camille. Truly. No more sidelines. He's always been family," Camille said. "It's time the world knew it." Inside the estate, staff were nearly done cleaning up. Gerard started to excuse himself to help, instinct driving him to return to service. But this time, Sabine stopped him. "No, Gerard," she said, placing a hand gently on his arm. "You've done enough. Today, we serve you." He blinked at her, surprised by the warmth in her voice. A moment later, he smiled. "Merci, madame," he said softly. "But please, just Gerard." The day after the wedding, Camille insisted on keeping the dress. Her bridal consultant offered to replace it, free of charge. A cleaner offered a miracle fix. Camille declined both. "I want it preserved," she said, "exactly as it is." She had the gown professionally framed, wine stains and all, in a glass case that hung in the hallway of her and Julien's future home. At the bottom of the frame, a plaque read, "In this imperfection, we found everything that matters: love, truth, and family." The story of the wedding traveled far. Friends shared it online, and within days, people across the country were talking about the bride who embraced the stain. Bloggers called it the most honest wedding moment of the year. Some even began rethinking what they wanted from their own ceremonies: not perfection, but meaning. But for Camille, the legacy of that moment wasn't in headlines or hashtags. It was in the quiet evenings she spent with Gerard, now a frequent guest in her and Julien's home. It was in the stories he told their nieces and nephews, in the way he taught them to whittle wood, tie a perfect knot, or spot constellations in the night sky. It was in the way he laughed when Camille burned dinner, and how he danced barefoot with her in the kitchen when a favorite song played. When Camille and Julien had their first child, a boy, they named him Lucien Gerard. At the baptism, Gerard stood proudly as the godfather, holding the child in trembling arms, tears trailing down his cheeks. He didn't say much, he rarely did, but he didn't need to. His presence alone spoke volumes. On the child's nursery wall hung a photograph, Camille in her stained wedding dress, dancing with Gerard beneath the lights. One evening, years later, Gerard sat with little Lucien on his lap, telling him the story behind that photo. "You see that red on her dress?" he asked. Lucien nodded, wide-eyed. "That was from wine I spilled. I thought I ruined everything. But your mother, she saw past the mess. She saw me. And that moment, that was when I stopped feeling like a shadow." Lucien didn't fully understand then. But one day, he would. And he would know, deep in his bones, that love wasn't about clean lines or perfect photos. It was about who stood with you when everything spilled, when the curtain dropped, when your hands trembled. Gerard passed away years later, peacefully, surrounded by the family he never expected to have. At his memorial, Camille stood once again in front of friends and loved ones. She wore a simple dress and no makeup. But on her wrist was a ribbon cut from her wedding gown, its red wine stain still visible. "I once said this stain was a symbol," she told the gathering. "Of love, of connection, of real family. Gerard taught me that those who love you don't mind when things get messy. They stay. They lift you up. And they dance with you in front of the world, even when the world doesn't understand." She placed the ribbon into the casket and whispered, "Thank you, Grandpa." And so, Gerard's legacy lived on, not in titles, not in inheritance, but in the stories told across generations, in the laughter shared beneath old trees, in a framed dress on a hallway wall, and in a truth passed from heart to heart. Family isn't who you're born to. It's who you love, and who loves you back, without question.